Hey YouTube, this is the first in a series of follow-up videos on this kit-built guitar that I bought off of eBay. Very nice fellow. Here, MRP is his initials, which you can see on the headstock. And so if you haven't already, check out my initial review. Obviously this is not a guitar that you can go out and buy, but review of this guitar as an example of a kit-built guitar and some considerations on should you buy a kit-built guitar that's already been built, or should you maybe consider building your own from a kit, and so forth. So if you haven't already, check out that video. But I very much liked this guitar. I don't usually buy kit-built guitars. I've built my own kit-built guitars, but I don't usually buy kit builds. But this one really stood out for a number of reasons, and I really loved the PRS style, the hollow body style, and so forth. And there's a number of features I really liked about this. And he gave me a fantastic price on it. I can't imagine he made a single cent. He probably lost money on it and was just doing it for the pure thrill of the build. Now, just very quickly, a few things that I've already done to it is I replaced the tuners. I didn't really care for the tuners that came on it, and so I put a nice set of Geiger locking tuners on it. And good, the Geiger, I've used their tuners multiple times on various builds over the years, and they tend to be very inexpensive and solid tuners. I mean, nothing super premium, but very nice tuners. So I've got those installed. Very easy, and I've been working on finishing. In this video I'm going to focus primarily on some of the stuff I've been doing for finishing, and particularly focus in on the question of should you consider doing a hand painted finish, which is what I've been going with on this. And so you can see I've been working over the Thanksgiving break on this. It's crusty right now because I was just working on some wet sanding. And so what this video is going to do is I'm going to explain the distinction between a hand-painted finish and a spray-on finish, pros and cons basically, and then show you the processes that I am going through to finish this guitar. It had a very nice, I really liked the way that he had this. It's almost a burst. It's very gentle, nice brown to yellow. It's beautiful coloration. Very nice. A lot of natural wood on this. It's a beautiful guitar, but I wanted it to be better finished in terms of a great, test. Don't do it in a conspicuous area, but you can, thumb test is like the painter's, basic test tool, is to see can you make a dent or scratch in a finish just with, a little bit of thumbnail. And this was not finished to the point that I could dent the wood if I pressed on it. And so I've been working over the break to refinish this, and I think that it's really coming along nicely, and the final product is going to be, I believe, a really beautiful, unique guitar. And as we move forward, that's the biggest thing with a hand finish, is that you are going to get something different than you get out of factory finishes. So stay tuned as we look at this kit-built guitar and some of the aspects of. So let's start out by talking about the difference between a hand-painted finish and a spray-on finish, which is what you're going to find on the vast majority of factory guitars for kind of obvious reasons. It's much faster, it's much easier, there's a lot less work that goes into a factory coating than a hand-painted finish. And so here are two examples. This is a Strat style. It's a kit build that I did, and this is one of my builds. Very pleased with it. I think it's just turned out gorgeous. It's got the spalted top on it and mahogany body and neck, and I decided when I built this guitar, after I got my hands on the body and neck and everything, the wood on this is gorgeous. It is gorgeous wood. I mean, I'm not putting any stain or anything. I'm just going to clear coat it. I'm just going to let that beautiful wood shine through. And so this is an example of, and I did a hand painted clear coat on it. I did the finishing, all the finish on this was hand painted. This is I just got this, and so check out my review of this, unboxing review of this Grote S Style HSS. And it's a very cheap guitar, the $100 guitar. This guitar costs less than the kit that I bought to build this guitar. Very, very cheap. I mean, like, ridiculously cheap. Right at about $100. Super cheap guitar. I mean, bottom of the barrel stuff. But as you can see in my review, it needs a lot of work, setup and stuff, but I was impressed with certain features, and one of those features is the body. I think, you know, don't look too close, because the body, it's really not, you know, great work, which you can't expect for that price. I mean, it's amazing that that it even is a guitar for $100, much less that it's playable or anything. The finish, though, it's not, again, you look really up close and like, oh, there's some runs, there's some this and that, but overall, that's a beautiful body. I really like the body on this Grote. Very nice. And so, you know, one thing I mentioned in this review is that if you are considering a kit build, but you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm there yet, buy a cheap guitar. This has good bones on it, and then just replace everything in it. And then you can feel as it gets better, as you replace stuff in it, as you do work on it and so forth. So, you know, that's one of the options that you have going forward. But basically, generally speaking, factory coatings, until you get into the high-end stuff, are all going to be spray-on jobs. That's universal, and it is for good reason, because it's fast, it's cheap in that it doesn't take a lot of labor. You know, they have these special machines that they have them rigged up on the body, and they can spin them, flip them, spray them, spray them, spray them, and then they go down the line. And then they usually have like a cook room where they dry them and kind of bake them, and then buffing and out the door. So very fast, which it has to be. It has to be. You know, all of the work that it took to build this guitar, I can't believe that they can even sell it at $100. I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. You know, and in some respects you get what you pay for, but I'm still, for the price, this is a you know, better than it ought to be for that base price. And not a good beginner instrument for various reasons that I highlight in my review, but it's got some good bones, and especially the body's very nice. But the issue with this sort of finish is that it tends to show damage very easily. So for example, this is a really gorgeous, I love this Jazzmaster, the Squier Jazzmaster, affinity level, absolutely gorgeous. And as I noted I did a review with this versus an Indio, and the neck in particular, this is what knocked the Indio out. The Indio's neck was not great. This has very nice neck, very nice. Really, really impressed with the neck. But this arrived damaged, and it took a pretty considerable little chunk of paint there. And initially, when this came out of the shipping box and I saw the damage and there were flakes of paint everywhere and some cracks, you could, if I wanted to, I could have kept chipping the paint back, because the fast spray, cook, buff, and out the door, the factory, the fast factory finishes, which is what you're generally generally speaking, going to find on all of your lower end gear. It doesn't soak into the wood. It more so creates, sometimes you hear like candy coating, it creates this like coating on the outside, but you get an impact damage, and then you get, a chunk that comes off, and then, it wants to keep separating. Now what I do to this kind of damage is first make sure that any like edges that are trying to peel up, I use this stuff. Is amazing, and I highly recommend it. I use it on multiple different things, and great stuff, but I'm very careful, because that stuff is highly caustic. It will burn you, and it's bad news to get on you. But very, very tiny amounts drizzled right at that edge where it's wanting to lip. You get it in there, so you make sure that it's good and adhered first, then sand it down and make sure there's no rough edges on it, then come in with some clear coat and finish over. That's what I like to do, partially because relicking damage like this is a cool process, and it shows the life that the guitar has lived. Trying to paint match and get an actual like restored factory finish is extremely difficult. You know, this is a really unusual, it's, I think they call this like rose burgundy mist or something like that. It's like this pink gold rose color. It's gorgeous, but good luck trying to like paint match this thing. It's metallic, it's an unusual color, and even if you can get the right kind of paint, getting everything to adhere right and it's always going to look repaired, and I think a bad repair looks way worse than relict damage. Another example, one of my earliest projects here on the channel was restoring and rebuilding this PV Predator, which is a fantastic, it's a budget USA guitar. Fantastic, 90s PV Predator. And this thing has seen use. It's got nicks and bruises all over it. And so this took, you know, some considerable body work, but rather than try to paint over any of the damage, I reliced it. As in I finished it. I've you know, sanded it down, and on this one I didn't go with clear coat. This one I worked carnauba into the wounds and got it nice and waxed, and went with the wax. That's because of the finish on this. This has a different kind of finish. Even though they're both urethane, the finish on this one is a lot closer to a nitro finish in the way that it sands down and so forth, and the vintaging and everything on it. The you know, just relicking the damage is my preferred method, right? Making it so it's not going to get worse, but it preserves what is there, right? It's like patina on old cars, right? You see these cars that have purposeful rust spots that they've then sanded down and clear coated over to prevent the rust from actually eating the metal, but you get that cool, you know, old-timey looking rusty finish. That's patina. This is like the patina of guitars. So the main reason that you pretty much only find spray-on finishes on most guitars is that it is just cheaper to do. Not so much in terms of the materials, you know, they're both paint, and, you know, you can get better and worse paint and so forth, but the reality is that hand painting gives a different kind of finish, but it takes a lot more work. With a spray-on finish, you know, you've got to prep the wood and everything, but generally speaking, you spray it on, you let it dry, and it's coated, and then you're going to buff it and polish it and out the door. Now with a hand painted finish, it's very different, and the way that it, particularly, you know, the way that it connects with the wood and the way that it bonds with the wood is on a much deeper level, generally speaking, than factory sprayed finishes. I know some manufacturers, a while back I watched a video in the Godin assembly line, and they were talking about their finishing technique, and the way that they get really durable finishes on their guitars is that they will spray a coat on, and then they will almost completely sand it off, and then they'll spray a coat on, and they do that multiple times because it really helps for the wood to bond with the paint, and then they come along with the final coats and so forth. And so there are ways that you can get better factory finishes with spray on and so forth. So the higher end stuff is going to be higher end. It's going to be higher end materials and workmanship and so forth. But the hand painted finishes are very, very hard to do, just in the sense of consistency and that, you know, that gloss finish. Now, the main issue is just simply the time that it takes, and how many coats, how many times you have to go back and smooth it and then recoat it and smooth it and recoat it and so forth. But you end up getting an extremely durable finish on your guitar, and particularly it is best for if you're going for a natural or close to natural, you're letting the wood shine through the finish. Like this has a stain on it, but you can still see the wood grain and so forth. And same thing with the back. It's got that beautiful mahogany body. I haven't started working on the back, so this is still the original finish on it, which is decent, but I want it to be more durable. I want to make sure that this is really well protected. And so so far I've primarily been focusing on the front with my work and so forth. And the process that I use is the same process that I use on my floors. And I've got lots of different painting experience, from, you know, fine art painting to painting cars to painting houses and floors. And in my home, we live in an old cabin my dad built, and the floors are all hardwood all throughout the house. And the original dwelling is about 50 odd years old, and so I've had to refinish. The refinishing process I use on the floors is the same I use on my guitars. And if you can walk on it and have kids and dogs and everything running all around on it, that tells you how durable it is. Now, one of the great advantages in terms of durability and finish is that it will not show near as much minor scratches, like the so-called belt rash that you get on the back. This is kind of spring-loaded almost. I've got these I've got them unmounted so that I can work around them on the finish, but this one just keeps wanting to jump out at me. But you know, the back with the light scratches that you get, the so-called belt rash, that sort of thing, you don't get that near as much. And the reason is that you already basically scratch the finish through the process of sanding, particularly the final sanding stages, and where you're using something called wet sanding, where you use a liquid. There's various ways to do it. You can use just straight water. I like using like a guitar polish. You can also use like a window cleaner and that sort of thing. But basically the idea is with each coat, and you want to have very thin coats. This is another major distinction, generally speaking, from factory spray-on coatings, is that they will do like 1 or 2 thick coats, and that's it. With hand-painted finish, you want at least, I would say, minimum of 4 to 5 coats, which is about where I'm at now. I'm at just finished my 4th coat. I'm trying to decide if I want to do a 5th coat. May or may not. I think that I might be getting close. But so the idea is that you paint the coat on, and you want to make sure it's good and thin. You don't want sticky, thick, gloppy coats. And you use a hand brush, and very, very lightly. Now, you know, everything has to be sanded down because you want it porous. You want it ready to, you know, soak up that paint. And so you do very thin, light coats with lots of brush strokes to gently work it down into the wood. And now you're not going to get a, you know, candy coated, like flat, perfectly flat, glossy surface, but that's absolutely okay, and it's to be expected. Okay, and what you do is with each coat, and this is where it's time, and, you know, in terms of hours, and days in terms of drying and waiting for it to harden and so forth. And you do not want to rush. You do not want to rush it, because if you come back and you start sanding and it has not cured, there is a difference, and this is a very important difference. There's a difference between drying and curing. Drying means you can touch it and it doesn't leave your fingerprints, you know, squished in there. Okay? But the problem is that drying is not curing. Curing means it is hardened. Not just that you can touch it and it's dry, but that you can sand it, that you can work with it, that you can do things to it, and it's not going to come apart, it's not going to unbond, and so forth. And so if you rush it, if you try to go to the next stage and sand while it is still curing, it will not be hard enough, it'll be too soft, and it's not going to sand right, and you can set yourself way back. You might have to even start over and sand it all off and start over, because it is a major problem if you work with the finish and it has not cured properly. And weather conditions make a difference. If it is cold, if it is wet, you need to add time to your curing process. And so this is not something you want to rush. You know, it doesn't take a huge amount of time per coat, but the overall process is very labor intensive. That, you know, you paint it on, and you have to let it not just dry but cure, typically at least a day before you sand it down, and you try to get everything basically smooth. And the idea is with each new layer you're going to finer and finer grits. You never want to use like really heavy grit. I typically start with around 400 grit and then work up to finer grits from there as I go. But with each new, after it's cured, then you sand it down, you get it nice and smooth, and then you do another layer, you do another coat, and then you let it cure, and then you sand it down, and each time you're getting a nicer and nicer finish. And the reason that it is so durable, not only does it really soak into the fiber of the wood way better than just a quick flash spray coating, but the other thing is that you are through the process of repeated sandings, and when you get to that final stage where you're using very high grit, you know, like 1500 grit, and you're doing wet sanding, those last stages, you get this really excellent smooth finish to it. And because you have already sanded it, it does not show minor scratches near as much. It is way more durable. And then, you know, you polish it. So the stages are, again, you're going to paint, let it dry, and then let it cure. You got to have a good hard cured surface, and then you sand, and you repeat that typically 4 to 6 times. You want an average of about 5 coats. And again, you want thin coats to really let it soak in. And you can get progressively thicker as you go, but you never want it gloppy. You never want a super thick coat because it's not going to cure nearly as well as thinner coats. And so it's paint, you know, dry cure, sand, repeat again and again, and you're getting finer and finer and finer as you go. When you get to the last stages, then you go in with the wet sanding, which is where you're going to use a liquid. You're going to sand with a very high grit, 1000 plus grit, somewhere in the 1000 to 2000 range. And again, you don't want to rush. You're not using a lot of pressure, but you're just, you know, smoothing it and giving it a nice, smooth finish. And your fingers are absolutely essential to this for finding the little spots where it's not perfectly smooth yet. And then you hit it with a little bit more of your liquid, and you work that sandpaper some more. You get a nice wet sanded finish. Then you go to your polishing compound, your rubbing compound, polishing compound, and finally then you're going to end it by waxing it. And so that is the overall process. It takes a lot more time than just spraying and forgetting about it. You have to do many coats, and you got to take your time. You don't want to rush. You don't want to rush either the application or the drying curing time. You've got to let it have time to do this. But if you have patience and if you work through it, you know, within a few coatings, by the time you get to about 5 coats in, you have a super durable finish. And when you get it all said and done, it will stand out in a subtle way it just looks different. It grabs the grain of the wood in a different way, and it makes it feel much more natural, much more just vibrant. And so I highly recommend going down this path, in that I think that hand-painted finishes are awesome. Just be aware of the processes that go into it. But if you're doing a kit build, or you have a guitar where you're going to take down and you're going to completely remove and refinish, doing hand-painted finishes are really, really great. Particularly, again, for stained finishes. It's not as great for you know, colors. Color, generally speaking, if you're going to do color, it looks a lot better to do spray coats. It does. But if you're going for a more natural finish, more wood grain finish, I highly recommend considering doing some hand-painted finish. And if you put the time into it, you will have a wonderful product at the end of it.